This is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast, part of the Seneca Network from Sup China. For everyone who's trying to learn Chinese or reaching for the next level, you came to the right place. I am your host, Jared Turner, longtime resident of China, co-founder of the Mandarin Companion Graded Reader series, and give a cat a fish and you'll feed it for a day. Teach a cat to fish and it'll get millions of views on TikTok. My co-host is John Pazin, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, founder of All Set Learning, the Chinese Grammar Wiki, Sinosplice.com, and although it's technically true, his wife doesn't seem to like it when he refers to her as his former girlfriend. This is our end of the year special, so let's get to it. Hey guys, this is Jared Turner coming at you from Utah in the United States.
Hey guys, I'm John Pazin. I'm in Shanghai, China. Happy New Year, everybody. Well, it's coming, I guess, right?
Real fast. But this is the end of the year podcast. It's a special podcast. We're going to review the top 10 interviews from 2021.
Right. So if you don't have time to catch every single episode, you might have missed some really good interviews. So we hope that we will highlight some really good material that you can tune into in full at your leisure over the holidays. And we're not going to do reviews this week, but we do still want them. So please give us reviews, send us questions, and we'll be featuring them in the new year.
All right. Without much further ado, let's get going. Honorable mention, Jeremy Bai, from episode number 72, The Truth About Chinese Subtitles. So this bonus interview here is with Jeremy Bai, and he's a professional translator. And for perspective, he has translated about 14 million words in Chinese. And for reference, like the whole Harry Potter series combined is like 1 million words. So he has done so much translating out there, but this is how he started out. You know, Jeremy, what we do at Mandarin Companion, we easy to read novels, Chinese graded readers. But now you jumped and you went, hey, straight to a wuxia novel, right? That is no small feat. So what was your experience doing that the first time?
It's a little bit complicated because the truth is that I actually failed the first time I tried to do it. When I was living in Manhattan, I tried it. I believe I picked up a Jin Yong novel, but it might have been a Gulong novel. I can't remember. And I tried to do it, and it was just too hard, and I gave up. Then, if I was going to put a date on it, I guess it would probably be 2014. I decided to try again. I was a little intimidated because I remembered that previous failure, and I was kind of nervous to try.
No, real quick, you said failure. What do you mean by failure?
Well, it was too slow. I was thinking, I can just use a pop-up dictionary, and that'll make it easy. Now, granted, pop-up dictionaries help for sure, but I started reading and it was every other word I just didn't get. Now some of this is because wuxia is not exactly necessarily the easiest thing to understand for a beginner. There are unique terms and even the names don't necessarily correspond to what modern Chinese people are going to use for names. It would be probably as difficult as if a Chinese person learning English suddenly picked up Game of Thrones and tried to start reading it English, which incidentally, my wife tried to do that. And it basically was the same as with me picking up wuxia. It's like the idea is cool, but then you start realizing how difficult the language aspects are. So for me, when I say failure, I think I read like the equivalent of like a page, and even with a pop-up dictionary, it was going so I was just like, this is impossible. I'm not going to be able to do this. So I was like, forget it. I'll wait till my Chinese is a little bit better.
Oh, man, I can really identify with this. I've done grad school in Chinese, but yeah, I've had a lot of failures along the way trying to read the news, trying to read books. It's also kind of interesting because the way you define failure, it varies from person to person. Some person might read one page and feel like it takes too long, and that's a failure. Other people have a more extreme version, but it's all just steps along the way, right?
That's right, and you got to start somewhere. Number 10. Sarah Koutalakos, from episode 68, Why is Chinese so damn hard? Sarah has a wonderful story about traveling during Golden Week, which is kind of the national holiday. It's the first week in October in China, so we're going to kick right to that. Sarah, I'm assuming you've been in and out of China, you've traveled around. Like, how has traveling played a part in you understanding China and Chinese?
So we've tried really hard to go to very unusual and interesting places in China. I visited Xinjiang, for example, in the year 2000. So I saw it in a very different state than it was today. But it gives me a basis on which to understand some of the, more controversial stuff that's happening now. But during our periods where we lived in China, as you know, China has these things called golden weeks, where the whole country gets a week off. So our goal was to travel during golden weeks to places in China without Chinese tourists.
Good luck.
Well, it turns out it's possible. So, we went to Inner Mongolia, where we went camping in a forest and, ended up being able to stay on the lawn of a Inner Mongolian family who lived in a yurt. Or, we found these crazy sand dunes that you could drive over.
Wow.
And then during another golden week, we went to the Nujiang Valley of Yunnan. In western Yunnan, there's a road that basically starts in the south and goes up to the north. And from the north, you can only walk then if you want to go somewhere else. And it's filled with Tibetan Catholics.
Really?
And so we had this guide who was kind of an ecotourism legend who was trying to get, conservation and things built into Yunnan. But he took us on a hike. We were supposed to camp, but it was raining too hard. So we walked up, we walked for probably 3 or 4 hours, and he ended up putting us up in his sister's house.
Wow.
Which, first of all, they had kids who were going to school in the village nearby. And I had a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old who were complaining all the way about how long this was taking. And kids their same age walk every week 4 hours down to go to boarding school in the village. So this was a great example of the poverty alleviation efforts that were going on and how they were moving people into the cities or giving them schooling there. And the funniest thing was we went to the house that we stayed in and they were cooking. And they had us help to stir the pot. And the first thing that we looked at that they were cooking, it looked like a really delicious soup. And I said, so what are we eating? And they go, oh, no, this isn't for you. First, we feed the pigs. And so that was what they were cooking for the pigs, which were very important to them. And then they cooked for the people. So anyway, just being able to learn about those things. And it's not that you go to a show and they're wearing ethnic costumes and dancing for you. You're really digging in and understanding. That was, I think, really, really fun. Really what it comes down to, you think again about the language. The language helps you understand the people. And China is not what the media makes of it, which is the government and the party. China is all about people. And being able to communicate with people and understand them helps you understand how we're not that different from each other.
Wow, that is such a great story. And, I love stories like this, John, because it's without having learned Chinese, it's there's no way you could have those type of experiences.
Yeah, I've had a lot of experiences like this, maybe not quite as extreme with the pigs and all, but I have tried to do the thing with my own family about traveling during Golden Week or whatever, when everyone is traveling. And although we didn't go to Inner Mongolia or Xinjiang or anything, we did go to just some smaller places in the countryside that are nice, but definitely not a premier travel destination. And you can have some really cool trips and experiences all around China. And really, that's what it's all about. You don't have to have them in the remote regions. Although I am really intrigued by this Catholic Tibetan thing. Anyway, so many opportunities out there if you have the opportunity to travel around China, right?
Totally. Number 9, Tom Connolly, from episode number 65, Going All the Way, Graduate Studies in Chinese. And to preface this for Tom's interview, he had spent, I think, a number of years in Benin in Africa with the Peace Corps. And later on, he learned Chinese after learning a tribal language there in Africa. So let's kick right to that clip. I'm actually really interested to hear a little bit about this. Compared to Chinese, I mean, how far did you get in a year with Dendi versus how far you got in a year with Chinese?
That's a great question. Dendi was so much harder to learn than Chinese, even though it's a less complicated language, because I had no real resources. I mean, I had one language workbook from the Peace Corps that they had typed up and given to the volunteers for this language, but it was just so much harder because there was so little access to resources. In Chinese, 2014, everyone already had smartphones, internet. I mean, you could just type in what you heard on Playco, and then the word comes up, and it's got a nice English translation. So, learning Dendi basically was just a lot of point, tell, speak, and then make sure what I'm pointing to they're comprehending, and that's what I want to know. That kind of real basic. So I think what I learned in 1 year of Chinese, it took me more than 2 years, at least 2 years, if not more, to learn that same amount in Dendi. Because I stayed in the Peace Corps for about 4 years. I did 2 terms in Peace Corps. And I felt like after 2 years in Peace Corps, I was finally able to do more than just say, hi, I'm hungry. So
wow.
Yeah. So Chinese, although much harder, the language picked up quicker because of the resources.
Wow. Now, hats off here to Tom. That is such an amazing thing to have learned a language like that. But I think what that story tells me, it's like, wow, Chinese is difficult, but man, there are so many resources out there to help you as a learner.
Yeah, it's like the hardest time to learn Chinese was 200 years ago. And now learning a language will never be that hard again. So stick to it, guys.
Number 8, Mark Dupont from episode number 73, Improving Your Listening Skills, Part 1. He lives up in Canada and a really great guy. So let's kick right to that interview.
I have to say that in terms of finding language partners, something also pretty cool happened to me about a year ago. Bear in mind, the place I live right now, so I have a place in Toronto because my life is in Toronto and my job's in Toronto, but because everything's been closed since the beginning of the pandemic, I've been an hour north of Montreal in a little town called Saint-Gabriel-de-Brandon. It's a 2,500 people town, and so there's very few people in the streets. It's a sleepy little town. And about a year ago, I was jogging and I came back and I saw this couple, like it's a very white, French-Canadian, little village in the countryside, surrounded by farmlands. And I'm coming back running and I see this couple, 50-year-old couple, and I go, these two people are from mainland China, which blew my mind because I'm like, this doesn't fit with the picture. So I stopped in my tracks in the middle of the street. It's just the three of us. And I said to them, "你们是中国人吗?" And so immediately they said yes. And they are from Henan. And they are my neighbors. So they bought a house a year ago. They speak no French, no English. They were living in Winnipeg, and they were looking for a cheap place to live. They Googled cheap places to live, and they found this house in Saint-Gabriel-de-Brandon where everybody speaks French. They moved there. And so now we're hanging out. They've got their garden on the side of the house. We go for walks. We have beer. If you told me like I would be hanging out with two folks from Henan in this little village, it would blow my mind. But it's been a great coincidence from a learning perspective as well.
Wow, that is fantastic. What do you think your experience would be with this couple if you didn't speak Chinese?
It would be non-existent because, first of all, I look at the way the neighbors look at them. There's no immigration. We're not talking about Montreal. We're not talking about Toronto here. There's no immigration. First of all, there's no common language. They managed to say some phrases. They're taking intensive French lessons, but it's very hard for them to get understood. We would not have even an inkling of a rapport like we do now. And so I'm heading back to the cottage in a couple of weeks, and we've already planned. They're going to give me a jiaozi lesson. They're going to give me a little cooking lesson at their house, which is
making some dumplings. Cool. This is a great example of, hey, you just get out there and, there's Chinese people everywhere. And that's certainly been my experience. It's literally anywhere I've gone in the world, I've found Chinese people.
Yeah, Chinese people are so widespread that by learning Chinese, you're just like enabling these magical coincidences. Like I've spent most of the past 21 years in China, but one coincidence that kind of blew my mind was a few years ago when my family and I were traveling in Australia. We were in the Gold Coast. We bumped into my wife's relatives that live in Beijing. And
wow.
I don't know, Chinese people are just everywhere. The ones that live in China, as well as the diaspora, they're just everywhere. It's really cool what it enables.
It also reminds me real quick of a pro tip I learned from an interview I did with John D'Andrea. I think it was early episodes. He had said that, hey, if you're lost in a city or even a country that you don't know, go and find the closest Chinese restaurant and talk to the people there. You're going to find Chinese people. You can speak to them in Chinese. They love it. And so they're usually very happy to help.
The secret underground network.
Number 7, Gabrielle Barnett, from episode number 74, Improving Your Listening Skills, Part 2.
Now, Gabrielle, she is from Jamaica, so let's kick right to it. Well, tell me, because I know what it's like. I'm a white male, and I've lived in China many years, and I know what that's like for me. But how do you think of your experience as being a black female on the tall end was in China compared to maybe what your experiences are the other peers?
Sure. So in the beginning, it was so easy for me to have conversations because as soon as I get into a taxi, because back then we didn't have Didi, they'd start looking at me and then there'd be that awkward silence because we could see each other looking at each other. And then they'd say slowly, 你会说中文吗? And I'd be like, 会. And then they're just like, oh, okay. Then they have so many questions. Like, where are you from? Why is your color like that? Like, why is your hair like that? Like, okay, tell me more. And then they'd like slow down the car just so that they could have time to ask questions. And, like sometimes my classmates would get annoyed by this, but I'll be like, oh my God, guys, this is like practice. These are people who know no English. Their accents are super authentic. They're not going to be like, oh, 我想去北门. They're going to be like, 哦，你想去哪里? 你要想去哪儿? 我想要你去北门吧. 好的, 好. So you're just like, oh, okay, all right. So, you have to get used to accents and like, this is good. A lot of people would want to take pictures. I remember someone took a picture of me when we went to the Great Wall, and there was legitimately a long line of people just waiting to take photos with me.
People hand you babies to take pictures?
Yes, I got a lot of babies. I got a lot of babies. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm like a celebrity. I'm like holding babies. Until one baby like pooped, and baby wasn't wearing a diaper. So.
Yes, that's... Not uncommon, right? You got the split pants in the back, right?
Yeah. And baby boy pooped right in my hand. And I was just like, all right, this is the end of me holding babies. But I feel like being a black woman in China, it's very different for everyone. It's a mixed experience. I can say that mine was mostly positive. Of course, there were a lot of negative experiences as well. But being able to speak Mandarin definitely made it a little bit easier. So like, I remember once I was in China, I was in like a shared Didi. And there was this lady at the front, and then they didn't know I could speak Mandarin. So I had gotten in, I was in the car, I'd gotten to the back, and then, a shared Didi along the way, he picked up somebody else, she got into the front. And then, as soon as he got to the front, like he adjusted his rearview mirror and, he started to look at me, and then he looked at the lady, and then they were like talking like, where do you think she's from? And, this lady was speaking so confidently, like, she's from Kenya. I know, because, I've lived in Africa before. She's from Kenya, and this is what people in Kenya and like. And, she's given a nice historical account of my life. And I was just like, this is fascinating stuff. Wow. So I grew up with tigers. Oh, tell me more. Probably was, like having amnesia or sleeping through my entire childhood experience.
Yeah, this is how it happened.
And then when I came out, I was like, all right, 再见. And I was just like, 我不是非洲人，我是牙买加的. And then she was just like, oh my God. And her face, like, I had never in my life seen somebody turn pink before. And I was just like, oh, so this is not actually a thing. People actually do turn pink.
This is such a classic story, right? Someone's talking about you in Chinese and they don't know you speak Chinese.
I love her attitude, though. She's so positive because, I think a lot of foreigners have these kinds of experiences and it's really easy to be negative about it. But when you think about it, what you're doing by interacting with these people in Chinese is you're eradicating ignorance as well as forming human connections. And it's really cool to see this kind of attitude.
Number 6, William White, from episode number 69, The Rivalry, Beijing versus Shanghai.
Now, this is a great story. William is a professional simultaneous interpreter. So what are some of the most challenging scenarios that you've encountered as an interpreter?
Physically challenging is, for example, being in a new model of car, which happened to be a very, very sporty variant, on a racetrack. because this particular car manufacturer wanted to get journalists from all over the world to come and test drive this new, very sporty, very fast vehicle. And they laid on a racetrack for it, and they had a whole line of these very fast cars. And at the front, they had a professional race driver. And in the cars behind, you had one or two journalists from motoring publications, usually from China, and everybody had signed health and safety waivers. Everybody was wearing a bit of protective equipment. Mm-hmm. But then my job was to interpret over walkie-talkie with the professional race car driver, telling them when to brake and when to turn hard to the right, hard to the left, and so on. Oh, and we've got a huge bend coming up here, but you can't see it as we're coming up to it, but we're going to be going right down to the right, so you want to brake hard and stay right over to the left here. So if you mess that up, then the consequences could be quite severe. But at the same time, it's also, you are physically on a roller coaster anyway. But interestingly, you sort of stop noticing that. You stop noticing the fact that you were on this, sitting in a vehicle driven by a racing driver, because you're busy interpreting.
Woo! Those are some high-stakes interpretation there, John.
That is crazy. Like, I've done some interpretation over the years, and I actually hate it. I never volunteer because it's very nerve-wracking for me. I don't want to get stuff wrong. I don't want to mess up people's communications. But man, I have never done anything like that. That is crazy.
Number 5, Adam Defrisco from episode 56. When should you start learning characters?
Now, Adam has a really cool story. I mean, his whole interview is really fascinating, but this is a great story about how he really changed his life course, and Chinese was that catalyst for him.
I actually ended up going to grad school in Ohio for hydrogeology, so water science. I remember the first thing I did was look up, does Ohio University have Chinese classes? They have a Chinese course. And they did, and I was like, okay, cool. So I signed up for the highest one, whatever the advanced one was. And I found myself doing the same exact thing I had done in West Virginia, which is completely ignore my geology work and just focus solid on. And it was to the point where, like, I was telling myself, like, I studied for 5 hours today, but it was all on Chinese. I wasn't cheating. I was just doing this instead of that. So it was even to the point where I would, everything was typed at that point. And I graduated in 2014. So everything was already, all the tests, all the essays mainly were on computers, and I could type out my prompts and all of that. And I was to the point where I refused to do that. And I was handwriting all of my assignments, which, obviously took significantly longer. And it was completely uncalled for, but I was, super into it. But I can remember the exact moment. I had a little office because I was a grad student, and I thought originally geology was going to get me outdoors, and I love being outside and hiking and all that. So that's another thing that I kind of realized pretty quick was, no, in fact, like if you're working in oil and gas and all of that, you're just looking at charts and data all day, and it's running models on software and things like that. So I was sitting in my office looking at 10 Excel spreadsheets and just numbers and isotopes and all this stuff. And I was like, no, my heart is not even a little bit in this anymore. I'd struggled with it my whole university career, and now it's into my master's. So I started looking up jobs in China. I ended up dropping out of my grad school and moving over to Beijing to be a teacher, like most of us who end up going over there for the first time. And I was living in Athens, Ohio. It's a cute little town, but especially after coming back from the big city of Beijing, it was like, something was pulling me back constantly. So that's what I ended up doing. And I found myself in Beijing a few months after I started grad school.
Wow. Now that is quite a story. Thanks for sharing that out.
Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for that. It's not easy to make that big change. I mean, what were your friends? What were parents saying?
Yeah, that was another kind of positive for me being at Ohio, is I did not make a lot of friends. It was actually kind of cutthroat, to be honest, over in the grad school, that department, because everybody was kind of competing for the same jobs, if you can imagine that. Like once you graduate, my classmates, we're all going to compete for the top jobs. So everybody wants their name on top of the papers. Everybody wants the credit for these assignments and things. So it was hard to make, good friends over there.
Part of academia.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's something people don't tell you when you go to grad school. My parents were hesitant, especially with me wanting to move over there, but they supported it, which was great. I think when I made the decision in my mind, I must have been on a plane 2 weeks later. I'm
sure. That's fast.
And I'm sure it's changed now, but back in 2015, especially out of English teaching, if you wanted to work there, you could get the visa in a snap.
Man, that is awesome. It's really great when someone finds like a passion like that and it's Chinese. And, I've seen that. And I feel like I felt some of that with like first learning characters and stuff. But I got to say, it doesn't always have to be that intense. Like, don't feel like if you don't have that level of passion for Chinese, then it's not for you. Because I'm not into writing characters anymore at all, I got to say. I don't know about you, Jared.
Not into writing characters that much either. But, I think what's really cool about Adam's story is just that he did pursue his passion. I mean, you don't have to do what everyone tells you have to do, right? You can chart your own course. And I think that's a cool story about what Adam did.
Yeah, it also reminds me of Daniel Pang because he was like already a doctor. And he's like, I'm putting this aside and going to learn Chinese now. Like, it's pretty crazy what people do, but it works out.
Number 4, Luke Neal. Episode number 55. Flashcards, spaced repetition software, and building proficiency.
Now, Luke started Mandarin Blueprint, and he talks a lot about his story of learning Chinese and getting that going in his interview. But I caught this little nugget of his at the end of his interview, and I think this is great because this is something I could relate to, and I'm sure many other people can too. So let's kick right to it.
Well, basically, throughout my school years, I wasn't ever really good at anything. And it wasn't because I wasn't capable of being good at anything. It was just because I didn't really care. I guess the only subjects that did interest me were French, English, and art. And, most of the teachers for those classes managed to beat that interest out of me. So I got this as well. Like when I left school, like a couple of my teachers just went, Luke, you could have done a lot better than you did. You're a bright lad, but you just didn't. And I was like, yeah, I just never cared, It was just the way school was set up, I suppose. But with Chinese, it was really the first thing, aside from martial arts, that I actually really invested myself in. In terms of like intrinsically, for me, learning Chinese is my first sort of truly rewarding learning endeavor, I suppose. Learning a skill that is not only really useful, but just has so many immediate and long-term rewards, and just made me feel like, do you know what, I am pretty nungan. I can do this. I can learn maybe other skills. It also led to other positive changes in my life, of course. I mean, I'm married to a Chinese woman, but, a baby with her. I have a great relationship with her family. And some of the things that Chinese allowed me to do, just connecting with certain people, this culture is awesome. It's very different. It's very different from our culture. Sometimes quite shockingly so, it's different. Going to a village in China and able to experience a real Chinese New Year was just something that not many people, even Chinese people, don't get to experience that a lot. Because most live in the city these days, So that was absolutely incredible. Just connecting with people, basically. And it's something I still do every day. It's something that I find great satisfaction from every single day. I still read and listen to Chinese, and it gives me that sense of magic, I suppose. It's really, do you know that feeling when you're a kid and you watch a Pixar movie, or that feeling of Christmas? Yeah. Reading Chinese does still give me that, like, to a much smaller degree, but like it gives me that feeling a little bit. And I understand this. It's still today. I don't know why. Maybe that's just me. I don't know if you feel the same way, but like.
So it's like it opens up a new world, that you just couldn't access any other way. That is just kind of like heartwarming to me, John, because, people like we feel like maybe we haven't really accomplished a lot. Maybe we didn't do as well in school or whatever. But, sometimes it's like overcoming some of those mental blocks that we have in our life that maybe think, well, we're just not that good, or I'm just not that smart or whatever. But, John, I think what's really interesting about what he's saying is that, out of all the things that he's gone on and accomplished in his life, and his business is being successful, and he's done a lot of other things, what he valued the most were the connections and the relationships in his life. And those were what were most rewarding to him.
Yeah, and here's the thing. He said that he didn't really care about all that academic stuff, and he never really excelled at it. He could have, but he didn't because he didn't care. And there are other people that really excel at other things. Maybe it's accounting or architecture or whatever. But it doesn't give them the kind of satisfaction and the human connections that learning Chinese does. And maybe they're not even that good at Chinese, but the reward is so much greater.
That's right. And I think it's a reminder to me that Chinese, it's a tool. And specifically, it's a communication tool, obviously. But really what it helps you do is connect with other people and with cultures, communities, everything.
Speaking of which, our next interview is kind of like that too, right?
That's right.
Number 3, Abigail Washburn. Episode 59, Bridging to Breakthrough in Abigail Washburn.
Abigail is a Grammy Award-winning bluegrass musician who also learned Chinese before she ever got into music. This is a great story of when she was touring China, playing bluegrass music with her band. We're going to kick right to that.
There is one story that was really powerful for me in Lanzhou. And we called ahead to see if the State Department called ahead to the local Lanzhou Wenhuabu and asked if anybody could collaborate with us for this one show we were going to have at the theater downtown. They sent a 12-girls band to collaborate with us. So 12 young women showed up with their instruments, only knowing how to play to a track. And this happened a lot, actually. And I started knowing what to asking that we don't play to a track. We don't play to a CD. We play live music. And that could be very, very hard to find collaborators who are willing to do that. But in this case, they sent the 12-girls band, and we ended up playing to a track with them because that's what worked for them. But then they also sent this elder Erhu master.
Erhu, yeah, I love the
me
Erhu.
Too, especially when it's played well,
so cool.
Right?
It can be sometimes like, a beginner playing the violin,
yes,
right?
The dying cat thing, yeah.
But it can be, when played right, it can be very beautiful. It's that distinct, anyone listening, it's that distinctly, how would we describe it? That sounds like the mysterious, I don't know how to even say, right?
Yeah. The resonance and the microtones that can be achieved on an erhu are really different than on a fretboard because the strings sit in the air. So there's a mysteriousness to that quality of not having something hard to bump into. There's a lot of air around the sound. So this erhu master shows up and he looks at me and he says, 中国人和中国乐手和美国乐手不合作音乐. He was just like, we really can't collaborate on music. I'm sorry, but Americans and Chinese were too different. And I said, oh, wow. I was really surprised that the Cultural Bureau sent somebody who would say that, But I loved it, too. I was like, dang, this is like a guy from Jersey, He's like, yeah, I can't work with you, And I said, okay, you might be right. We might not work well together. And then I was like, but do you mind playing something for us? Because we've come so far and we just so love to hear what you play. And so we started playing this beautiful Tibetan melody on the erhu. It has that sort of high mountain holler that you can find in America, too, and those beautiful soaring Scottish pieces that made their way to the Appalachian Mountains. It was just really beautiful. And our fiddler pulled out his fiddle and started just pulling on a string and finding the pitch to match this guy. And so we all found it and started just sort of droning along with him. And then some of the musicians started finding some harmony notes that really kind of fleshed out some beautiful harmony under it. And then the fiddler actually started catching pieces of the melody and started playing it with him. And when he stopped playing, he looked at all of us and then he started playing something else. So we started playing with him again. And at the end of the night, he came to me and he said, I discovered something tonight, that music isn't about people of different nations playing together. It's hearts connecting.
Beautiful.
心和心的沟通, so communication between hearts. And that was very beautiful. He opened my eyes to the fact that that's what it is. That's what we do. So no matter what our perception or our fixed position that we think we exist within, it's an illusion. It's all hearts communicating.
Oh, man, Jared, nice erhu imitation there. You're quite the master with the musical sounds.
I've been practicing that.
No, but that's a really great story. And I'm always impressed by how language and music, they have this unique connection, this kind of interplay. We've had other, musical masters in the past. And sometimes language doesn't work, but music does, or sometimes music doesn't work, but language does. And it's amazing how it can cut right to the heart for that connection.
yeah, it's just like, wow, it was wonderful how she used her language skills to even make this happen, to even get over there to China and do these different tours. She's been over there a number of times on tours. But then you going beyond language and connecting with music, I think as the Erhu master said, connecting with hearts, right? It was really, really something special. And I just really love that story.
Number 2, James Wong. From episode 60, How Chinese Food Can Help Your Chinese.
Now, preface on this one, James Wong is profoundly deaf. So that means he's actually lost like 85 to 90% of his hearing. And his father is a native Cantonese speaker, but never spoke Cantonese to James because he was just struggling to learn English growing up because of his severe hearing impairment. So this is actually quite a special story. He later on learned Chinese and then went to Cantonese. So let's listen to that. Your father, he's from Hong Kong. He speaks Cantonese, right? Now you're learning Mandarin. How has that impacted your relationship with your father or even any of the family members you have on the Hong Kong side?
So none of them actually speak Mandarin at all. And I think originally my dad was a bit confused why I wanted to learn a language. I think maybe that's quite an Asian thing. It's like, why you want to learn a language? Just work hard and make money and blah, blah, blah. However, one of my plans was to learn Mandarin to sort of maybe B2 level, which is around HSK4. And then I wanted to learn Cantonese. And the reason I wanted to do it in that order is because I feel Mandarin is more standard at the moment. There's a lot more resources, a lot more books, etc. So I did that. And then last year I studied Cantonese on and off for about 9 months. I made a video on this actually. It's actually blowing up in Hong Kong at the moment. It's got around 150,000 views. So I studied Cantonese in secret by myself. I didn't tell my dad. And then at the end of 9 months, I called him up on Skype and I said, I'm going to speak to you in Cantonese. And we had our first ever conversation in Cantonese, and I put this all on YouTube.
Well, tell me about it. What was that like?
So my dad moved to England when he was 11 years old. So when you speak to him, you think he's from England. So talking to him, I was just incredibly nervous. Like it brought me back to when I first learned Mandarin, and you're ordering coffee for the first time ever in Chinese. And yeah, it's so nervous, speaking another language. It's one of the hardest things at the beginning.
How did your father react when you spoke to him in Cantonese?
I think he was shocked. I think he was surprised we were even able to have a conversation. He knows I'm in Taiwan. I don't know anyone here who speaks Cantonese. He had a smile on his face and he was just like, okay. And then he just continued talking with me. And then I asked him, what do you think? And he was like, I genuinely didn't think you'd be able to have any sort of conversation. Here we are. You studied Cantonese, another language which they don't speak in Taiwan, to a sort of basic conversational level. And he was just really happy, I think.
How did you feel about that?
I felt so relieved. It's one of those things where I'm like, can I actually do this? And I think a lot of people, when they're learning languages, they have these points where they want to give up or they think, this isn't for me. And especially for someone with the hearing loss, like, why do I keep putting myself through these things that require good hearing? And, it's trying to, like, a person who's almost blind trying to learn how to paint art but there's people, I see people who do rock climbing with one arm, or there's that skateboarder guy who's blind and he does like ollies and grinds rails. And I look at these people and I'm like, they wanted it. They didn't see their disability as a reason not to do it. So I thought, I can do the same thing. Why not?
You started out the story, really, about your parents were never sure if you were ever going to be able to really speak English.
Exactly.
And then for one day, decades later, there you are speaking to your father in Cantonese in his native tongue. I can only imagine what he must have been feeling at that time.
I'm sure he's pretty surprised. Asian people don't always express exactly what they're thinking, but you can see it in his eyes.
And it's on video, right? So,
yeah, I'm so happy it's on video because I watch that back every so often and it makes me happy.
Man, talk about payoff for your efforts at learning a language, right? It might even be that, Mandarin was kind of a stepping stone along the way to getting him to feel like he could learn Cantonese, even though it has fewer resources, right? And being able to do that helped him form a greater connection with his dad. It's so awesome.
Me being a father myself and putting myself perhaps in his dad's shoes and recognizing all of the obstacles that he must have gone through to even get to that point and be able to speak to his father in basic Cantonese, really. It's just really heartwarming and very inspiring.
Number 1, top story of 2021 on the You Can Learn Chinese podcast is Michael Berry, episode 70, Reading the News, Do's and Don'ts.
Now, Michael Berry, he is an academic at UC Irvine, University of California, Irvine. This guy is pretty amazing, and he's done a lot of interpreting. He's been involved in the literary circles in China and the filmmaking and cinema stuff. And this story is something that was actually, I think, is very impactful to the world as a whole. So let's listen to this story. So, Michael, one of your more recent projects was the Wuhan Diary. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
So over the years, I've done a lot of literary translation projects, translated, mostly novels. And one of my more recent novels was a book called Soft Burial by a writer named Fang Fang, who is based in Wuhan. Now, when the coronavirus outbreak first began, I would text Fang Fang and make sure she was doing okay, just check in on her, she and her family. I didn't realize that she had started writing a blog online that went viral. And she started this quarantine diary on January 25th of 2020.
25th, lockdown in China happened, I think, within days of that?
Yeah, the Wuhan lockdown began on January 23rd. So 2 days after the lockdown, she started this blog, this quarantine diary. And it very quickly went viral. And she started getting 2 million hits, 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, started getting as many as 50 million readers. Many of them staying up late at night, waiting for the next installment to be uploaded. And it became, of course, there were a lot of accounts of what was happening, especially from state media, CCTV, Xinhua. Everyone had their account. There were a lot of independent journalists, international journalists. But somehow this account cut through all the noise, and it became the kind of go-to platform for people to get the so-called real story of what was happening. Because, of course, government media is going to have its own spin. Whereas Fang Fang there was a certain truth where as she saw it, she said it. And when the government screwed up, she called them out. When they did things good, she gave them credit. She had information about what the situation at local hospitals, the condition that doctors were facing, basic medical information about COVID-19, how it's transmitted and how to protect yourself. Keep in mind, this has just started. Everyone is kind of walking into this dark tunnel. And so she's trying to understand what's happening and process that. And it was a very raw explosion of her emotions, of her fear, her anxiety, her anger. I read, I think, 1 or 2 installments. And I just said, wow, this is so much more just puts a human side on it that we're not getting from CNN or CCTV or any other official media sources. There's limits to what you can do in 5 minutes or in 1,000 words. But this was, sometimes 3,000 words every day, 5,000 words, long entries. And it built up. And so you really got a real sense of what people were going through during this first lockdown. Of course, we all have now know what it's like to live under a lockdown. The whole world does. But nobody can go back and understand what it was like during that first lockdown and the fear and anxiety when they were just figuring this thing out. So anyway, I write to Fang Fang and I said, why don't we put the novel aside and let's just do this? And I'd like to translate it and let's publish it as a book. She hesitated at first because she wasn't even done writing. The COVID-19 was still on. The word COVID-19 didn't even exist at that point. It was just called the novel coronavirus.
Yeah.
And so she said, I think it's premature. Let's just put a pause on it. But about a week later, she wrote me back and I started translating. And it became an experience unlike anything I've ever done in my life. So over the next, 6 weeks, I was working 7 days a week, more than 10 hours a day, translating more than 5,000 words every single day. And I was trying to catch up. And there was a pressing sense that this thing that's being unleashed is being completely misunderstood and ignored in the West. And so many people didn't realize what was happening. They didn't realize the brevity of the situation and how it potentially could also impact us. I remember as I'm translating it, I went to see my internist and I mentioned what was happening in Wuhan, and he said, "Oh, it's just like the flu. It's not a big deal." And I had just read an entry where she talked about a family of 4 being killed within days after contracting COVID-19. Those kind of experiences made me feel just how important it was to get this voice out there and to wake people up and make them realize, no, it's not the flu. This thing can kill you. You have to take it serious. And so I worked round the clock, and the book was eventually published in mid-May of 2020.
Wow,
I finished the translation just a few weeks after she completed it. It was you hear about simultaneous interpretation. This was kind of simultaneous translation. And I was also kind of reliving Fang Fang's experiences, because as I'm translating, LA became under lockdown, and all the things that she had been experiencing and writing about in the diary, very quickly I began to experience in my own everyday life. So it was a really surreal experience that I was going through doing this. And probably the most surreal part of it was that Fang Fang also had become the target of nationalist trolls, and they started sending her death threats, and she became the subject of a major disinformation campaign. And when news broke that this book was going to be published internationally, I also got pulled into that. And so I started receiving the death threats and the hate mail, and there started to become fake news reports circulating in the Chinese internet about me. That I was a CIA agent, that I was an operative, that this was the proverbial knife that we were handing over to the West to hurt China, when, in reality, it couldn't have been further from the truth.
Now, that is really an amazing story. In fact, you can go out there and you can read this book. It's Letters from Wuhan. You can find it on Amazon or wherever.
It's funny when you think about being a literary translator, like what could be safer and, more insulated from the rest of the world. But this literary translation project not only became intimately tied to his own life and experiences with COVID, but also got him pulled into misinformation campaigns. It almost becomes like a spy story, right? It's really an amazing experience with Chinese.
Definitely. But, sometimes just getting out there and having enough experiences, those opportunities will come to you, and you'll have things like that where you can really make a difference in people's lives just by having your Chinese skills.
Yeah, so you can learn Chinese, and what you will gain from it, it's really hard to say, but man, the possibilities are endless.
So there you have it, folks. Those are the top 10 stories from our interviews in 2021. My question is, what's your story going to be next year?
We're looking forward to lots of interesting stories next year. We'll have lots of interviews, of course. We hope that the number one story of next year will not be related to COVID. We can't control that. But anyway, the learning continues. We're all learning Chinese. We're looking forward to a great new year.
John, are you still learning Chinese?
Yeah, man, every day. That's one of the reasons I started a company, because I can just learn Chinese forever, every day.
Well, I'm learning Chinese too, John.
I know, you're going to upgrade the crap out of your Chinese.
2022 is going to be my year.
All right, guys, happy holidays, and thank you for listening.
Let's all hold hands and skip.
再见.
You have been listening to the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. Help us spread the word by sharing this with your friends, classmates, teachers, cousins, mother, explorer, traveler, builder, repairman, chef, skier, woodsman, singer, and that one gal named Grace. You can subscribe in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And please write us a review so we know how we're doing. You can find us on Facebook and at mannercompanion.com. Apologies to John Cena, we just ran out of time. The You Can Learn Chinese podcast is produced by myself, Jared Turner, and our editor is James Harper with Filter Productions. I'd like to thank our guest interviewers, Michael Berry, James Wong, Abigail Washburn, Luke Neal, Adam Defrisco, William White, Gabrielle Barnett, Mark Dupont, Tom Connolly, Sarah Kudalakos, Jeremy Bai, and of course thanks to my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, John Pazzi. See you next time.